I think ultimately it's about people coming back into embodied soul-led living, where their life force is moving freely. And there can certainly be different pathways to get there. And sexuality is such an effective straight route to do that.
What if your body is not something you have, but is something you are? Welcome to the Brilliant Body Podcast. I'm your host, Ali Mazet, somatic therapist and sexologist with a lifelong fascination for the challenges and opportunities that come with being the bodies that we are. Join me and other body masters as we explore the art, science, and brilliance of the body and debunk the mind-body split by expanding the meaning and experience of intelligence, which goes way beyond just thinking. So let's dive in. My next brilliant guest, Ariel Szabo, is a writer, somatic sex educator, sexological bodyworker, and psychedelic medicine practitioner based in Los Angeles. Her work weaves sacred sexuality, nervous system repair, relational healing, and plant medicine traditions shaped by years of study with indigenous wisdom keepers in Peru. She works with individuals, couples, groups, and practitioners in deeply embodied spaces of transformation. Ariel writes on sexuality, power, and liberation through her body of work, The Erotic Frontier, devoted to shifting how societies relate to sex, power, and healing, and positioning erotic awakening as a force for personal and collective transformation. I'm so excited to get to have this conversation with Ariel, who is the beloved partner of my friend and colleague, Rahi Chun, who's been a guest on the podcast several times. So now I get to have Ariel all to myself and explore where this conversation is going to go, because it could go all kinds of places. So here we go. Hello, hello.
Hey, Allie.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm glad to see you.
Yeah, it's so good to see you.
I know. We're going to get into all kinds of things. I'm not even sure what and how and where, but
Me
I'm sure it's going
neither.
to
We
be
can
a
figure it out
fascinating
together.
journey. Exactly. Exactly. And I just want to mention that this podcast has a philosophical bent, and
Uh-huh.
I'm particularly interested in the intelligence of the body and the erotic intelligence of the body, which I know you know so much about. So I just wanted to mention that as much as I'm interested in your actual expertise, I'm even more interested in your perspective on life and love and sex and power and politics and all those things. So feel free to really use this time and space to talk about the stuff that I know you delve into in your Substack, beautifully written, by the way.
Thank you.
And we certainly could talk about the practice of sexual healing, et cetera, et cetera. But honestly, I'm even more interested in how your sense of sexuality, how your experience of sexuality has shaped how you live in the world and your whole life trajectory before, now, and what you might want and anticipate in these years to come.
I would love to talk about all that. That sounds really fun.
Goody, let's do
Yeah.
it. So, is there
Yeah.
anywhere in particular you want to start, or do you want me to start asking this list of questions that I have?
Um, yeah, I think I'll just have you lead the way.
All right, I'm just going to really go for it. One of the things I think about a lot, particularly in this day and age, not that it's new, but it seems particularly extreme because of the global capacity that we now have through technology. The paradigm of domination has been with us for millennia, tens of thousands, maybe even millions of years. That planet Earth seems to have more or less been based on this particular paradigm, this design of domination. And
Yeah.
yet, of course, there's all kinds of species that are not based in that. And there's human species, indigenous tribes that are not based in the commerce of physical strength, basically, and monetary strength now in the modern world. So, of course, one of the most famous contrasts is between the bonobo monkeys and the chimpanzee monkeys, who have this entirely different society, one based in domination, the chimps, is more patriarchal, and the other, the bonobos, based in this matriarchal culture where sex and pleasure and connection is much more the focus and the mode to deal with conflict. So that's my opening gambit. And I'm just curious what your view is about why are we so tethered or have been so tethered to this paradigm of domination? And what does that ultimately have to do with sexual vulnerability?
Yeah, first of all, sign me up to live with the bonobos. You have so much to teach us.
Yes.
And if we just think about the way that the United States, a lot of Western civilizations have come into be what they are right now, it's through domination, it's through conquest, it's through raping and pillaging people who lived there before the people that came in. So there's a foundation of power over. And when I heard you mention that there are communities, and particularly indigenous communities, that live in another way, that's actually how I first, in my own body, got to experience another way, power with,
Mm,
learning about reciprocity and what does it feel like to stop trying to control everything and dominating everything from what I want or I'm trying to achieve, and instead of start listening to everything and partnering and collaborating with it. And all of this, of course, seeps into our sexuality because we start dominating our own sexuality as well as other people's bodies, our own bodies, other people's bodies. It seeps into every area of our life. And I think there's something particularly vulnerable about sexuality, first of all sexuality is one of the most vulnerable human experiences that there is. When we really allow ourselves to be seen in that place, whether seeing ourselves or someone else, we're like seeing the soul, we're seeing life force come through in its purest form. And that's why I think it's particularly vulnerable, as well as why so many people want to dominate it, because it's so powerful.
mm,
It's creativity, it's life force, it's passion, it's desire. So powerful.
mm. How much do you think the impetus and all the institutions that enable domination and perpetuate and perpetrate domination is based in that vulnerability that we inherently feel around sex, which some of us enjoy, typically sex because of its vulnerability, whereas a lot of other people will run from sex or try to package it or perform it or pervert it in a variety of different ways or avoid it altogether because of that vulnerability.
Yeah, there's so many people who are so terrified of it. And what that makes me think about is shame
Mm,
and how shame is used and wielded as a form of control from people and institutions that dominate.
mm,
And it's such a powerful form of control because once someone feels really shameful about anything or about their sexuality, they're going to do the work of the oppressor to keep themselves small and quiet
mm.
and compliant. So
So
the shame
shame.
does the work for the oppressor.
Yes, isn't shame a fascinating phenomenon that humans have? And not just humans, dogs have it. They're the other species I know the best. But certainly other
Mhm.
animals know shame. They experience
Mhm.
it. Whether dogs have it more than other species because they're the closest to humans, I don't know. Maybe they've just picked it up. But what the hell is shame?
And shame can be so useful
Of
and
course,
needed,
look what's happening now that there is no shame, it seems, in
right?
our leaders, and we're seeing the consequence that there's no accountability without shame. So that's perhaps the positive, or necessarily a positive
Mhm.
iteration of shame. But of course, it has done so much damage. And arguably, it's really what's underlying what is motivating a lot of the people who are trying to dominate in these really aggressive and harmful ways. Underlying shame from their youth and their early trauma, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep. So much shame, so much unmetabolized grief just coming out so sideways and so violently.
Yeah. So, what else about shame? What the hell is it? Is it natural? Is it indigenous? Is there shame in indigenous cultures, for example? Is it human
I
or
think
is
it's
it
human.
Western and industrialized, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I think it's human. And it has been wielded in a violent way, in the same way that power has been wielded in a violent way, in the same way that sexual energy has been wielded in a violent way. Like shame is a useful, necessary part of the human experience. But when I think about what is shame in my own body,
Mm.
it feels like a coffin to me, like a suffocating energy
Mm.
that restricts my cells, my voice, my muscles from any sort of movement. So there
Yeah.
might be an impulse to do something, but I can't do it because I'm held back from the shame, which creates a lot of fear. Fear is very intertwined with shame of me because I'm afraid of being seen because I don't want to be seen and my perceived badness. I'm
Yeah.
so shameful about how bad and wrong I am, and God forbid anyone see me and find out the truth.
Yeah. Badness. Ooh, we have to talk about that. But I really want to ask you when we were talking about the inherent vulnerability of sexuality, why aren't you afraid of it? Why
Oh,
are you so drawn to it? And do you think you always have been? Did you come in that way?
yeah, I think I did come in that way. It is my dharma and part of my purpose in this lifetime to
Yeah.
shift the paradigm around sexuality and love and pleasure and grief. And I've had a rough road to get here. There has
Yeah.
been a lot of fear around sexuality in my life because of the way that I was conditioned around it, and also because of things that were done to me violently. And the shame that that created, the shame that I took on that was not my own and made me shameful of my own sexuality instead of putting the shame on where it belonged, which was the perpetrators and the people who were violent towards me.
Yeah.
But I've always been like, I've been exploring my sexuality since I was a little girl in very innocent ways, as many of us do. But I was also introduced to adult sexual energy inappropriately as a little girl. So sexuality at a young age became very intertwined with fear and danger. But yet I've had this determination throughout my whole life to keep moving towards it. So many years of determination to get free in my sexuality.
Yeah. I
Uh,
so relate to that. I feel the same way. It's been a similar journey. I'm just determined. Despite all my suffering, I've always just had this deep sense of what was possible. And
yeah.
that it always had a quality that was both quintessentially romantic in the intimacy that could be shared, what we call romantic, meaning love and enduring love. But there was also always a sense of the flesh and God or spirit being one, that there was always a sense that they could become one and the same with somebody else becoming one and the same, or others becoming one and the same. And I don't know where I got that notion because it's not exactly Cinderella. Like, how does a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old somehow intuit that that is possible?
Mm.
And yet, this is where the rubber hits the road, you could say, that sex and physical energetic pleasure meets the life force and therein the erotic, that melding of all those things.
Yeah, and you know what I think is so amazing too in thinking about this? drive that we share,
Yeah.
is that it's actually sexual energy that drives it, that drives the drive that's behind it. Like it's life force energy that has kept us going
Yeah.
despite everything, all the obstacles, all the suffering.
Yeah. And yet, tell me if this is the case for you. And this kind of comes back to shame, is even when there's been early perpetration,
Yeah,
which both of us have experienced, you in a violent way, from what you've said, that the response of pleasure when there is terror, fear, pain, these seemingly conflictual sensations along with pleasure,
yeah,
seems to create a rip in the psyche, or can, wherein shame often falls because it's so confusing that it's easy to then want to avoid it, or as you were describing, splint ourselves or constrain ourselves from having to go into that kind of abyss that can be there of confusion, which is so beautiful with the work that you're doing. And you're helping tease apart and pull apart and clean all of these conflations, which was what I do with personal geometry in a non touch way. But it is just the cleaning of these things that have all been melded and confused and manipulated by perpetrators sometimes. But I'm curious what you think about how much of this drive also has to do with an early experience of sexual pleasure, even if it were in the context of fear, danger, cruelty, manipulation, any and all of those things. What do you think about that? I've heard this so many times with clients and friends and lovers that they experienced really early sexual stimulation that was highly pleasurable and deeply confusing because hormonally their bodies weren't even primed yet to be able to metabolize and circulate it. So they would be just super overly stimulated and then very confused by it, and then being driven to have more of it, not just because it was pleasurable in some ways, but because, again, they're trying to tease apart the confusion that they may or may not ever do consciously in their lifetimes.
yeah. That feels like a layer of truth in my experience. I think there are so many different layers to it, but absolutely a drive from trying to tease apart and figure out what's even happening within me, but also a drive for a new outcome, a new
Yeah.
ending.
Yeah. And you've succeeded.
Oh my gosh, I have.
I have too.
Sometimes it blows my mind. I think about years when I was just stuck in this loop. And I had this drive of, I know it can be different. I just know that there's this way that I can experience, particularly in relationship with another human being, sharing myself and just the way we could merge and experience sexual energy and pleasure and safety. And for a long time, I just was holding on to what felt like a dream, but also a knowing. And that was not my experience for a long time, many, many years.
Are you comfortable talking about what would be the word, your passage through stripping and then sex work?
Yeah,
Is that okay?
yeah,
So were you able to hold on to that? I mean, obviously you must have been, because here we are, and
yeah,
you became a sexual healer. And some of us need to go through the trenches and the shadowy, shadowy places in order to just learn from the mud
yeah,
and arise from the mud and the ashes.
yeah.
So I'm just curious about what that was like during those many years when you were dealing with quite an extreme of experience, how
Mhm.
you managed to, that's funny, the word is coming, withhold, protect this place in you that understood that somewhere within even this was this sacred place within at least you, if not others.
Yeah, when I first entered sex work through a heteronormative paradigm, through stripping and I'm sure there are strip clubs that exist that are queer, but those were not the ones that I was in. Yeah. I was really looking for connection to my authentic sexuality, which I had not been able to touch yet. I was looking for a place to explore my sexuality, my power. I was looking for a place to be able to be free in my sexuality when I felt like so much of the time in my normal world, I needed to keep myself small. I shouldn't be too sexy. I shouldn't look too good. So it was a place of play for me. And very quickly, it became a very dangerous place for me because I didn't know how to feel into and express my boundaries. I was a kid, 19 years old. I was in way over my head. And I had so much unmetabolized sexual trauma at that point that was getting kind of like poked at in
Yeah.
that space. But it also wasn't all one thing. There were moments of empowerment and agency and play and fun, and there were moments of deep confusion and pain and suffering. And I had my first experience as a full service sex worker. That was a positive experience. I really felt my agency. The client was kind and listened. I felt super powerful leaving with all this money that I had made. It was a high. And then not too long after that, I was sexually trafficked for 2 years.
How did that
During,
happen? When I was reading, I didn't catch how that transition even happened.
yeah. So I had been stripping while I was in college on the weekends. And then I go back home to Massachusetts, the Boston area. And I'm coming home after all these pretty extreme, exciting experiences. I go back to an old job I had at a dog grooming salon, and I'm at a bus stop. And a young man with a lot of swag, who I later come to find out is a pimp, comes to chat with me and starts grooming me.
Mm.
And we hang out, and he was experienced. He knew exactly how to manipulate and exploit my vulnerabilities, being really like desperation for protection and love from a man,
Yeah.
wanting to belong, wanting to feel loved and seen, and wanting to make money.
Yeah, all the stuff we're hearing about in these Epstein files. And
Yeah.
obviously, that's the exact same dynamics going on.
Yeah. So there were very few people at that point in my life that had known that I was stripping in college, and no one who had known, maybe one other person at that point that had known that I had had sex for money. And I told this young man, and he applauded me. He told me that I was smart. And I felt so, in that moment, all the shame lifted. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh, this person sees me. I'm safe with them. I don't have to hide. They love me for who I am. And the next thing I know, he's back over with throwaway phones. He's putting me in hotel rooms. He's telling me we're going to make a lot of money together. And throughout the time that we were together, one of the ways, shame was one of the tools that he wielded that did the work for him. And he would use a lot of we language throughout the time that this was happening. All the different women that he trafficked, each woman had different vulnerabilities, and he exploited each one of us in different ways, or manipulated us. He exploited all of us.
Yeah, it's interesting you say this, and we don't have to go political, but I've been thinking a lot about Epstein and how he was able to do what he did. And I certainly can imagine that he was highly charismatic, highly perceptive, very empathic, maybe even psychic, had qualities probably based from his own trauma and survival strategies where he was able to attune to people to an extraordinary degree, not just to girls and women, but also, of course, to all these powerful men. And it's
Yeah.
quite a superpower, obviously.
Yep, it is. And then another thing that kind of kept me trapped, not just the shame, not just this man's prowess in manipulation and all the things that you just laid out, the skills that he had,
Yeah.
but the fear that I had in being jailed myself. because of it being illegal.
Would he threaten that?
He didn't really need to because the police were all over him all
Mm.
the time. And he had several run-ins with them over selling drugs. I had run-ins with them. And the run-ins that I had with them, never once did they ask me if I'm okay and need help. They did the same thing that he did. They were trying to use me as a means to an end and just trying to
Mm.
get information from me. So I did not have any trust that I would be protected.
There's that word.
There's that word, protected. I was really looking for protection. What I ultimately found out is that I can actually protect myself with my boundaries and when I live in my body and when I am fully in touch with my own erotic energy.
Ah, so do you actually feel safer when you are fully in touch with your erotic energy than you feel exposed? Because of what we were saying earlier, you can't be too attractive, you can't be too sexy, you can't be too powerful, or you'll get hurt.
Yeah.
It sounds like you found your way to the opposite, where you feel safer.
I feel so much safer.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Tell us more. Tell us why.
Yeah. It hasn't been a linear process, but when I'm actually
Mm.
fully in my body and taking up space in my own body, no one else's energy can get in because I'm taking the space.
Mm.
So I can also feel what's happening. I can feel my nose. I'm able to express them. And yeah, even just this past year, I've gone through this really interesting process as I've become more public in the work I do. So being more vocal about the fact that I have sex when I teach extended lovemaking or that I'm a sexological body worker and I touch people's genitals. I've noticed that the more just honest I am, the safer my body feels. And it's been wild because even this past year, I've had a cervical awakening, and the cervix
Mm.
only opens and regains pleasure when the body feels safe. You can't,
Mm.
there's no way around it. Like I could have clitoral pleasure even if I don't feel safe. But cervical pleasure will not happen if you don't feel safe. It's directly innervated and connected to the vagus nerve.
Wow, that's so cool. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. And how much, if I may ask, has getting married to Rahi? Because that was about a year ago, right?
Yeah, that's definitely been a piece of it. There's so many contributing factors.
Yeah.
And then I also feel that the cervical pleasure helps me speak my truth more. Like everything,
Yeah.
it's all feeding each other. But there also have been moments where I've been really scared. Like when I first started being more public, I was very, very nervous, feeling like I'm going to vomit, having all
Yeah.
these memories of being really like punished and shamed in high school for being a sexual person. So it's definitely been a process, not easy, but where I am now, being seen is good for me. The soul doesn't want to hide. The
Mm.
soul does not want to suppress.
It's
That
beautiful.
is how we start cutting off our life force energy and how we start cutting off our sexual energy, which is what feeds everything we do in our life.
Mm. I love that. So beautiful.
Hmm.
And it's going to be really something to see what happens in these next 3 years with people in your profession, my profession, adjacent professions with sexuality and empowerment and relationship. To what extent we will remain safe.
Yeah.
Do you worry about that? Or do you feel like, no, this is the hill I'm willing to die on? This is the work. This is the warriorship. This is what we came here to do.
Yeah. I have moments of worry, but ultimately, I feel so strongly about speaking the truth and about fighting systems of oppression and saying no to abuse that I will die doing this. They won't shut me up. Not anymore.
Love it. I love it. There's several things I want to return to or spiral back up through, which is this issue of young sexuality. And
Hmm.
as we were talking about, can awaken earlier in some of us, or we just come in that way, and then either positive or traumatic experiences can awaken us to sexuality earlier. We can be exposed to it or see it or hear it. And now, of course, with the internet, it's a whole other ballgame with how people are being exposed to sexuality before they can possibly understand it or contextualize it. What is your view on how to help people contextualize it? Which includes even adults who are watching porn a whole lot because their spouses no longer want to have sex with them, or because they can't find a partner, or because it's easy access, or because they aren't comfortable talking about aspects of their sexuality that therefore they can't experience with the person they're with. Just what do you think about how we can ever navigate and learn people who haven't how to discover their authentic sexual power?
The first place my mind goes is how we need a complete overhaul in sexual education.
Yeah.
And we need sexual education that teaches about sex and sexuality in a context of pleasure and consent.
Mhm.
Just baseline.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'd really love to see in that basic sexual education is talking about pleasure as something that can be used as an escape in a disembodied way, or pleasure is something that can be used in an embodied way to go deeper into yourself, to
Ah,
connect to yourself, another, to connect to source. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about that, which can get mixed up in any dogmatic ideas around pleasure is sinful or pleasure is an escape, or you can use pleasure as an escape, but you can also use pleasure to come into yourself more.
I love that. I love that. And what I have witnessed over the years is this odd phenomenon. I'm curious what your view of it is. When someone becomes sexual, they can switch into almost this other persona that's like
Mhm.
what I'll call this porn persona.
Mhm.
It's a visible dissociation where they're no longer all of who they are and
Mhm.
all of who they are sexually. They almost like it can be subtle or quite distinct, where the voice changes and the way of being changes and the vocabulary, obviously vocabulary can change, all these things. It is almost like you're suddenly dealing with a different person,
Yeah.
which to me is a kind of escapism, like you're talking about, rather than expanding and integrating more of who they are and experiencing my integrating more of who I am. What do you think about that? And
Yeah,
do
I
you know what
mean,
I'm talking about? That kind of porn trying.
oh, do I? I have lived that in my past.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, so much of what people call sex, which I also think we should be redefining that word, but so much of what people call sex is actually performance, endurance, or compliance.
Yeah.
And as we've been discussing, how vulnerable sexuality is, how vulnerable it is to bare yourself naked in that way, there are a lot of people who aren't willing to do that or feel unable to do that. And everyone can build their capacity to do it. But God, look at the movies and media and look at the porn. If that's where people are getting their sexual education, they're going to start copying it.
And entrained to it as nervous
Right.
systems, for sure.
Yeah, it's really tragic to me. And in my experience, and then as well as from what I hear from a lot of people who are having those types of sexual interactions where it's just like performance, they're not actually leaving satisfied. There's always this kind of hunger left in them. And a lot of times they don't understand why. It's confusing.
Mm.
I wanted sex, it just happened, and I still don't feel satisfied and met. And you can't feel satisfied and met when you're performing. It's not possible.
Hey folks, it's Ali, shifting the focus for just one moment. Let's be honest. Most people are quietly struggling with something in their sexual lives. Low or unmet libido, sexual shame, not being able to orgasm, watching porn more than you might want to, or being in a relationship where sex has just disappeared. And most of the advice out there, it stays in the head. But these patterns don't live in your head, they live in your body. So I've created something different, my body mapping video journey library. These are guided experiences that help you access your body's intelligence and actually see what's driving these patterns so that you can start changing them literally in your own flesh. In about 30 minutes, you'll map what your body knows onto the page, desk, or floor, and walk away with clarity, relief, and a real sense of where you have agency. The first journeys cover libido, sexual shame, and your relationship to orgasm, with more on potency, porn, sexless marriage, and other topics coming soon. It's private, it's powerful, and it works in a completely different way than anything you probably tried. So if you're ready for something that actually gets underneath the problem, you can find the Body Mapping Video Journey Library at www.alimezey.com/body-mapping-journey-library. Or you can just scan the QR code on your screen or in the notes and go directly to finding out what your body knows with personal geometry. That's a lot of unsatisfied, unmet people out there.
Oh my God, isn't it? And all that dissatisfaction, all that disappointment from not being met, over time it ferments.
Into grief. Yeah.
Grief, resentment,
Yeah.
anger.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of going back to the perpetrators and people who are very violent, a lot of
Mm.
it is stemming from deep disappointment and dissatisfaction.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I suggested that once to this woman I met at a dinner who worked for the UN, and we were discussing sexual violence.
Hmm.
And I was saying something about the basis, and this goes back to the chimps and the bonobos, the basis of so much violence and conflict in the world may very well be sexual repression, dissatisfaction, insecurity, all these things. And she pushed back so hard against that. The numbers don't show it, and that's not true. And of course, it's not something I can prove other than from my own personal and professional observations in terms of how an individual will express themselves in the world based on the quality of the sexual interaction and fulfillment that they themselves are experiencing. But I bet you would agree with me.
Oh, you know I do. We could
Yeah.
change the entire world with a sexual revolution.
I totally agree. Are you sure that it's not just because we're completely biased and obsessed? And I do
Oh,
wonder that
yeah.
sometimes. I mean, certainly you and I, as we established early on, both came in with this sense of it. You called it Dharma. It's in
Yeah.
my astrology. It's always been in my interest. It's been in my path in all kinds of different ways, positively and negatively. But to me, it seems pretty logical and
Yeah.
lived, because if I'm fulfilled, feeling fulfilled, I'm much kinder towards myself, and therefore much more productive, much more effective, much more kind. Again, starting with myself, which obviously translates very differently in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe it's true, and there are many truths. And I think ultimately it's about people coming back into embodied soul-led living, where their life force is moving freely. And there can certainly be different pathways to get there. And sexuality is such an effective straight route to do that.
Sure works, doesn't it?
It sure works. It's very
I mean,
effective.
it is quite astounding how quickly one's state changes when there is pleasure, hopefully safety, connection to self or others involved, for sure.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I've heard you speak about, and obviously you write about and work with, that pleasure becomes connection. You wrote that in your article, Sex Magic. And that's such a simple but crystallizing phrase. Pleasure becomes connection. That there is a quality of attentiveness and attention because pleasure is such a strong experience that it draws us right into being
Mhm.
present, wherein we can experience connection, whether that's to ourselves or others. But
Mhm.
talk more about that, about pleasure becomes connection versus a lot of people view pleasure as selfish, hedonistic.
And it makes me also think about this idea that we were talking about pleasure as an escape versus pleasure as coming back into oneself. So I do think that ultimately, no matter how you're experiencing pleasure, it does bring you into connection. But is it connection that's going to sustain and connects you to the web of life? Or if it's connection that you're using to escape? I don't know. I just have this image right now of leaving this web of life and going into this like wormhole in space where you feel the sensation of pleasure, but it's, oh, I'm all alone, I'm isolated here. But pleasure as connection,
Wait, wait, wait,
yeah.
wait, wait.
Okay.
Some of us could feel that in solo pleasure, that I'm feeling all this pleasure and yet I'm not connecting with any other human in this, which can lead to a lot of grief. So
Yep.
I just want to acknowledge that, yes, when there's self pleasure and solo play and exploration, you can feel more all of who you are and even commune with the universe. But there can also be, particularly if that's how you're experiencing your sexuality year after year, a
Yep.
lot of grief in it.
Yeah. And that I think is embodied pleasure. When you're really, it touches grief, it touches all of who you are.
Mm.
I guess when I was thinking about the wormhole, I was thinking about if someone experiences pleasure when they take pain pills or heroin or something, but disappearing. It's an
Mm.
escape. I don't know. I think there's even more to pull out in this idea of
Okay, then the parallel there, the
okay.
wormhole out in the sky versus masturbation.
Yeah.
Is it's like jerking off masturbation is the parallel there, as opposed to full-bodied exploration during which you might cry or you might
Yeah.
really feel a whole spectrum of emotion and insight and hopefully some degree of self-love or at least intimacy.
Yes. Yes.
Will I be brave enough to leave that in? We'll find out.
We'll find out, but it was beautiful. It was yes.
But it's true, right? I can definitely experience that in myself. I can be like, I just want this pleasure to feel more relaxed, to feel good, to go to sleep, to remind myself that I'm a sexual being, to just alleviate some pressure, which is very different. You could also describe that as performative in a sense, meaning that it is abbreviated and perfunctory and even performancy, which is a totally different quality of sexuality and erotic experience that is far more sensual and whole body based.
Right. Gosh, I'm thinking about my own experiences with masturbation where I am just doing it just to relax and just
Yeah.
quickly get off. And then when I'm like gonna luxuriate and make love to myself.
Yeah,
Two
totally
totally
different.
different experiences. And I like them both. Different things for different times.
Yeah, which, okay. So in that case, is there a place for performative experience with other people? Is that not the same thing where sometimes you do just want to get off and have pleasure and even experience this trance-like alter ego? version of oneself that is sequestered or compartmentalized in a certain way. Is there not a place for that as well? Obviously, there is because there's tons of it
Yeah.
abounding.
And yeah, like
Yeah,
what I think is too bad is if that's all that's available to someone
there it is, that
and
it
they
has
don't get to have
a choice.
choice. Yeah. What do you want right now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Instead of feeling just stuck in it because that's all you know, because that's all you've seen, and you're emulating something that is outside. And so there's an objectification both within oneself. I've been
Right.
thinking a lot about that. I was just teaching at my class yesterday. We were talking about objectification and how when one has been objectified, particularly really young, one can learn how to objectify others, which you could say our whole economy is based on objectification. But there's a lot of threads we can go down here. And I haven't even gotten through half my list. I knew this would happen. Okay, I'm gonna pick. So I want to talk about the anxiety. You talked about this on my dear friend and colleague Claire Senti,
Mm,
and we'll put that episode with you and Rahi in the show notes because it's wonderful. And one of the things you talked about is the anxiety that can come with erotic pleasure, and that how we can just get so uncomfortable we need to discharge it, which we were just somewhat referring to. But I'm also talking about it as just someone walking around in the world and that fear of being too powerful or too attractive, too magnetic, or just too unfamiliar with feeling that aroused in the largest sense of that word, that awake, that alive. People call it juicy, which could be literally one's tissues, not just vaginal tissues, but just all of us feeling hydrated and permeable and engaged.
yeah.
Talk about that anxiety that is very common for us to feel uncomfortable with due to that oh, that was a terrible sentence. So would you talk about the anxiety some of us can feel with circulating that much erotic energy?
Yeah, because it's so much sensation, and it might be sensations that our body isn't used to. So it's really capacity building and expanding our container to hold more and more energy. And I've already had so many different sexual awakenings, times when I'm starting to feel more sexual energy move through my body than I've ever experienced before. And each time that happens, there is a period of some discomfort. I'm just like, oh my God, this is so much energy. What am I going to do with this? And many people are not accustomed to, haven't been taught to, haven't learned the skill of circulating energy in their body, particularly if it just is only living in the genital area and
Yeah.
you're walking around in the outside world with so much sensation in your genitals. That can be uncomfortable, I think, for multiple reasons. That can be uncomfortable just because it's so much sensation and you're like, oh my God, I just want this to go away. But also, it can bring up shame for people because of the way we're conditioned around what does that mean or that's not appropriate. I think ultimately, it's really just a capacity building of learning to hold more and more sensation. All of it is just arousal energy, and then also learning to move it through the body to circulate it.
Would you just speak about two or three tips you could even say of how to do that?
Yeah. So I would really recommend starting a practice like now, not when you're in the midst of a lot of new sensations and energy, of moving energy through the body. There's a great book that I used years ago when I was learning to really circulate energy called The Pathways of Energy. A lot of people who study sexuality will refer you to the microcosmic orbit, but you can just plant your feet on the ground, use your imagination and breath. You can try it in multiple directions. You can pull energy up from the earth and circulate it through your whole body and then down. Or you could try pulling energy from different parts of your body, like whether it's from your pelvic area, your genitals, or from your heart, and like breathing into the energy there and then using your imagination and breath to move it. Just so you get familiar with what does it feel like to move energy around in my body.
I'm pausing for a moment because energy is something that is understandable to a lot of people and not understandable to others because it's
Mhm.
easy to think, oh, I don't think I know what that is, even if we're necessarily experiencing it because we're alive.
Right.
What does that mean to you? What does it feel like to you to move
Hmm.
energy?
So to me, it means to move the life force that's always in me and everyone and everything consciously around. And it's taken me years to develop the sensitivity to really feel into this because I was disassociated for a long time.
Yeah.
And the more and more sensitive I become, the more and more I can feel all these subtle energies moving through me and other people and the world around me all the time. If you can't really sense into energy in that way, but if you have a mind that has the capacity to imagine, you could also imagine like water moving through you or wind moving through you. You can also, while you're self-pleasuring, when you're building up all of this arousal sensation, you could then pause and use your imagination again and your breath again to see if you can move the sensation up and around your body, up from the genitals into other places.
Yeah, I talk about it and teach about it like fiber optics.
Mm, I want to
And
hear.
yeah, because of spending decades doing body work, helping people to find inside their own sensational awareness what is holding so that it's physically passive, but the conscious awareness is active in a way that people aren't used to because most people think they think in their skulls.
Uh-huh.
They think in their head area and don't know that they can move their mind through their matter. So
Mm,
it's if you can, I think almost of consciousness or conscious awareness as a light source, and Philip Shepard talks about this a lot too, but you of being able to move it around to a place so that people can start to feel that actually you can move it. I mean, that's what happens when we're in pain. Our consciousness is actually moving our attention into pain, which is why pain can be such a great teacher. There's no
mm,
doubt about it that all the injuries I have are part of what made me a master body worker because I had to constantly be going in my conscious awareness to all these different parts of my body that were ailing and injured and healing.
mm,
So that's one of the ways I talk about it. But I'm a very flesh-based kind of person. So rather than thinking about it in terms of energy, which naturally is a repercussion of that kind of conscious awareness, as my experience, the more I'm attending to the sensational, the physically sensational, fleshy experience of any intricate part of my body, energy seems to naturally intensify or expand or move or change. So
mhm.
that's just another way to think about it. And it's really helpful. I love how you're also talking about it in terms of an element that is, again, more tangible than energy, which can seem amorphous and just like air, which is invisible. So thanks for also talking about that it could be water, or as you said, I guess you talked about wind, which is obviously also air, but because it has force to it, it feels more familiar, I think, to a lot of people. Yeah. There's so many things I want to talk to you about more. Like how you got out of where you were as a trafficked sex worker to become the healer that you are. Obviously, it happened over several years, but how did you bring back that vivid drive that we talked about from the beginning of this conversation about just knowing your purpose and knowing your that North Star within you? I don't know if you'd call it that or not.
Yeah, I definitely went through a period of thawing when I was no longer being trafficked. Actually, there was a transition because while I was still being trafficked, I got my real estate license.
So you already knew you wanted to get out then, it sounds
Knew
like.
I wanted to get out, and I had negotiated that I would no longer be put up in hotel rooms, and that instead I would go to the strip club and find my own clients. and they would be higher paying. So I would see less people. I would pick them and they would be regulars. So I negotiated safer working conditions for myself. And I started to see from multiple ways that I had a lot more power. Like he would say yes when I negotiated things. So there were multiple little acts of rebellion that created space for me to see that it was actually him who needed me, not me who needed him.
Ooh, that's a game changer. Wow.
Yeah. And it created space for me to start to envision a new life for myself. So I got my real estate license. And then there were various circumstances that supported me in leaving him and pulling away from him, which included a move in location and where I was living. And then I got into real estate, and for 10 years, that was my drive. I wanted to be the top luxury real estate in Boston, and I worked my way up from rentals. And then in 2016, I developed a facial nerve tumor on my seventh cranial nerve that paralyzed half my face. And that was a real awakening from spirit to shake me up and be like, hey, Ariel, we have a different path we want you to look at. That was a real spiritual awakening from me, and also a real blow to my identity, which allowed me to break apart and start to put myself back together in a new way.
Yeah.
It was also the first time that I had felt cared for by my community. The amount of people that sent me flowers when I came out of surgery from the facial reanimation surgery and the tumor removal, I was just like, people actually care about me? I had no idea. And then the public grieving I did over the shift in my face, the shift in my identity, the shift in what I valued myself for really gave me the kind of like strength I needed to start to go into many other things that I had not grieved yet that were knocking on the door and waiting for me. And I felt called to start working with psychedelics intentionally rather than recreationally. And ayahuasca called me. And working with ayahuasca was really my initiation into the way that I use the term sex magic, in working with and collaborating with our sexual energy to heal, to transform, to expand.
Mm.
There was one ceremony where I really felt into that authentic sexual energy, that life force, and it was moving through my entire body in a way I had never experienced before. Every cell was like pulsing and open. And then over the coming years after starting to work with ayahuasca, I came back to sex work through a queer counter-normative door of sexological body work.
Hmm. Can I ask you something
Yeah.
about what was your sex and sexual identity like when you were spending those 10 years in real estate? Were you
Yeah.
still in a performative way of being? Like, obviously, you must have been so skilled and so confident, I imagine. Or maybe that's a myth that sex workers would feel really confident sexually.
Yeah.
What was that like during that time?
It was a whole mixed bag of many different things, and it shifted over the years. There was a period of time where I started exploring polyamory, and I was having sexual exchanges with multiple different people, and it was so empowering for me. I remember that I had specifically been like, I just want to be able to enjoy sex with people because there were periods of time where sex was always painful. Every time I would cry, I would disassociate. I felt like I couldn't do it. And then that
Wait,
was
even professionally or just personally?
personally.
Uh-huh. So you
And then
could if it was professional and transactional, but not necessarily personally.
this was while I was in real estate and I was no longer a sex worker.
Okay.
Yeah, there were different partners I had, and then I got married. And it's even interesting to look at what happened in my sexual relationship in my marriage because when we first got together, we were a great sexual match. And there were some ways in which it was performative, but There were also ways in which I was numb, in which I didn't even realize I was numb. I didn't even know at the time. So for me, it was actually great sex. It was meeting me where I was. But then as I started doing more healing work, it wasn't feeling right anymore. And it was really hard to figure out why. And then me and my husband really grew apart sexually because I was really shifting and changing, and what I wanted and needed was really shifting and changing. And we weren't shifting and changing together.
Yeah. So what did you figure out was the reason why it wasn't working anymore?
I wanted to have soulful, embodied, cosmic, connective sexual experiences. And he did not have the capacity and embodiment to step into that with me.
So even now, after what you just started describing about these ceremony experiences of being so profoundly permeated with life force energy, do you compare yourself ever to some ideal you have about the ultimate orgasm or the ultimate erotic state? Or do you feel really fulfilled? Like you feel like you've already experienced what there is to experience?
I feel super satiated and met in my sexual world, and I know there's so much more to experience that I don't even know about yet. But I feel like where I am right now is that I'm experiencing the type of sexual life and satisfaction that I dreamt about for a long time.
That's fantastic. That's amazing.
It is. It really is. I need to stop and celebrate it more often.
Indeed. I'm sure many, many listeners would want to learn a lot more about that path, which we'll have in the episode notes. Are there any other particular ways that you want to tell people about how you can help them experience that too? Because lots of people want to have that too.
Yeah. As I shared, ayahuasca has been such a support in my path. And of course, everyone's experience in working with a plant medicine is so individual to themselves. But I do have an upcoming opportunity to sit with ayahuasca in Peru, where my colleague and I, Candice, hold the space, and there's Shipibo maestras running the ceremonies. And in between ceremonies, we support the process and integration with embodiment journeys, and I bring in my passion of pleasure. Candice brings in her passion of astrology, and it's really, really a very potent container to go into the depths with yourself.
Oh, amazing. And unfortunately, we need to wrap things up when I could talk to you for hours, but I asked two questions to everybody, and I want to make sure to ask these. The first
Hmm.
one being, how do you define embodiment?
Mm. Being alive in all of my senses, my sense of sight and smell and touch and sound, and also like a connection and dialogue that's able to happen between my physical body, my emotional body, my energetic body, my spiritual body, my mental body.
Love it. And what do you enjoy most about being the body that you are?
Oh my gosh, the wide degree of sensation that my body is able to experience is mind blowing to me. The pleasurable ones, the uncomfortable ones, they're all a gift. And it continues to amaze me as I continue to live, the more and more types of sensations that I get to experience.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much for being with me and sharing
Yeah,
all that you
yeah,
just
it's
did.
such a juicy conversation we had.
For sure. And I hope we keep having many more. So let's keep on going. And I'm going to get to see you soon too, which I'm really looking forward to.
Oh, amazing. Yes, onwards with our sexual revolution to change the world.
There you go. Exactly. Thank you for listening to the Brilliant Body Podcast. To continue exploring your body's brilliance, visit the show notes for resources and free events. And if you'd like to learn more about working with me, visit alimezui.com. And one more thing. There's a reason podcasters blab on about ratings and reviews. They truly help these conversations reach more bodies who are ready to reclaim their brilliance too. And it's so easy. You just go to the main page of the show and look for those 5 stars. Follow us if you haven't already. And best of all, write a rave review. I'd so appreciate it. It only takes a moment, and it's a gift that keeps on giving. And as always, and more so than ever, keep reclaiming your brilliant body.